Konnichiwa, fellow otakus, Cosmo K13 here. So in my last video, I reviewed the sequel of Soulscape created by Power Friends Games, also known as Soulscape. And if you saw said review, you would understand how I felt about the game. There are so many flaws both game and story-wise, I felt insulted by the notion that we had to wait 2 years just to get this hot mess. To be fair, Soulscape does have some good points, but they aren't enough to hold up the ship after exposing so many holes. Originally, I was going to have an ending bit in the review where I explained how they could have improved on Soulscape, but that video was almost an hour long, and I don't like long videos on my channel, mainly because they're a pain for me to upload and work with, given I'm the one doing the video making and editing. But I still wanted to explain ideas that could have improved the sequel, so I decided to make a separate video dedicated to it, which I am doing now. I'm going to give my 2 cents on how Soulscape could have been better handled and been a way more exciting experience. Now, I want to point out that these are my personal ideas for the game. I'm not saying the devs needed to include these concepts, but given what went wrong in Soulscape, these improvements might help in both story and gameplay-wise. In my review, I pointed out 6 main flaws with the game, which are listed here. If you want to know what I'm talking about, I suggest looking at my review first before going any further so you're all caught up. If you did watch the review, then I'll continue. These are the concepts I'm going to focus on in order to improve Soulscape. I'll also add in smaller bits that could have been fixed as well, but let's focus on the prime examples first. In my review of Soulscape, I mentioned how the developers wrote Anti's character incredibly poorly. Most of this is due to the presentation of the Chimera. Anti doesn't really get enough time to breathe as his own glitchy character, since he's too busy tormenting Angus for no justifiable reason other than to be an ass. Him being the quote-unquote villain makes the story bland and confusing, especially when after all that torment, he's revealed to have been a child that was just acting out. As mentioned before, his arc isn't redeemable since it's just handed to him via an excuse rather than earning it through our own understanding. Personally, I don't see a reason to make Anti the villain at all. So how would I fix this? Simple. Have him join Angus and the Septiceye egos. Really think about it. The premise of Soulscape is to fix Angus's soul due to Anti separating Posse and Nega from the survival hunter. You can still keep that story, but add Anti into it. Maybe somehow Angus and Anti still meet in that weird place, but have it be the hospital Anti was in. Set it up as a horror movie where Angus goes to investigate and finds Anti freeing the Chimera, and the child still separates Posse and Nega. Not maliciously like in the original version, but more out of desperation because he can sense his own soul within Angus. Then the hunter wakes up to see he's his past self again, but the main difference is that he ends up taking Anti with him to his cabin, meaning Anti is now in the mindscape. You can then properly have them introduce one another with some tension at first, since Anti still wants his soul and Angus wants to be rid of the creature, only for Posse and Nega to intervene by explaining Angus's side. Again, Anti is supposed to be a child in this. I can see him being cautious and defensive, but maybe somewhat scared of Angus because he's the one that took Anti's soul from him, which would most likely have traumatized the Chimera, and it's only through a mutual understanding that the two agree to find Henrik and figure out a way to fix the both of them because Angus and Anti are both suffering at this point. Have it be where the two are in critical condition. Maybe due to him not having a soul, Anti's body is starting to deteriorate, and that's why he's so desperate to reclaim Posse and Nega, just as Angus is losing his soul without the angel and devil supporting him. The alteration to this main plot is that Angus and Anti would work together to save themselves, because if Angus gets the soul serum and his soul is all fixed, he wouldn't need Posse and Nega anymore, therefore giving them to Anti. The two would be able to gain much more by working together rather than just this senseless bickering, and during that time, we can see a bond between Anti and Angus. I see so many similarities these two egos have with each other. Both were created to serve a certain purpose, and once they outlived said job, they were disposed of in a sense. For Angus, it was when he was forgotten, and for Anti, it was when he was no longer valued as a test subject. Both had spent so many years suffering physically and mentally as well as soul-wise. Sure, said pain was caused due to the other, but as the story progresses and time goes on, the two might be able to use their traumas to bond and do some healing. They could be each other's support, helping them through nightmares and past pains, while getting to understand one another and realize that they both are at fault, but they can still make it right. Have Anti realize the horrors Angus faced when he was dying after being forgotten by the community, and in turn make Angus realize how much he damaged Anti and his home by taking the Chimera's soul. One of the main issues with Soulscape is that neither Angus nor Anti realize the full consequences of their actions, and their sins are dismissed because of their beliefs, when in reality they have done so much damage that a simple apology isn't enough to erase the pain. I'm not saying that Angus and Anti are 100% guilty, and I can't sympathize with their reasoning, but we can't also excuse them with what they have done, considering how much it affected many people as a result. Having Anti be with the group during that time could help Angus come to terms with what he has done and realize that he is just as much to blame for hurting Anti. And upon learning how Angus died, Anti understands why Angus had to seal his soul to survive, but feels sorry knowing that Angus had to live a life for 5 years at the cost. It could strengthen their character development and growth. Plus, in keeping with the theme of dealing with trauma and overcoming it, that would fit so well, as one of such ways is to have a buddy system, something that Henrik and Chase do for each other, but we can actually see it with Angus and Anti. Auntie could also take this chance to learn more about the mindscape and see the outside, as, in canon, he's never been able to leave the hospital, so seeing him interact in the mindscape with the residents would make for fun comedy and wholesomeness. Also, using Auntie could help to show off how protective Angus is when it comes to the egos. As he gets closer to Auntie, Angus would feel a brotherly bond of sorts and wants to look after the Chimera, showcasing his nature as the protector of the egos. Soulscape doesn't need to have an overarching villain. Not every story needs a hero and villain. What it needs are characters and obstacles that prevent them from getting to their goal. Sure, many times said obstacles can be humans or people, but there can be environmental or inner conflicts. We already have a problem in Soulscape. Auntie and Angus need to have their souls fixed. To do that, they need soul shards, which are inside the egos' memories and guarded by manifestations. You already have the obstacles, the manifestations. They're the bad guys in the story, the ones preventing the characters from reaching their goal, as well as having the egos admitting their traumas and finding ways to help them overcome it. These are the points we should be focusing on in Soulscape, not having Auntie being a little bitch for no reason. If you're concerned about needing enemies in the Omniverse, there's a simple solution for that. Use the scientists that were in that hospital. You can still have the group, along with Auntie, being transported to the Omniverse, but instead of the Chimera being the main enemy, why not use the white lab coated people instead? I'm pretty sure they'd be hostile given the fact these outsiders have one of their projects. Hell, they might want to end up using Auntie in order to try and fix the state they and the world are in. And when you defeat them, Angus and Auntie might end up being transported to a powerful memory they both share, where they both die and got their soul taken. That could be the memory they have to relive in order to get the final soul shard, something they earn themselves instead of it being handed to them. It would make the ending much more satisfying because after everything the egos went through, they managed to achieve their goal by their own hands. And the party for Auntie can still take place with Angus alongside him since Auntie has proven himself to have been one of them with how much time he spent with everyone and how he helped them. Having Auntie be part of the group would help us get to know the Chimera better and help Angus admit his faults and find ways to fix them. And learning more about Auntie leads into my next point. In my review, I stated how the Omniverse fell flat in terms of presenting new lore on the Scape games. I was excited to learn more about this universe that parallels the Mindscape, like Hyrule and the Twilight Realm. And when we do get some information, it's not enough to keep our interest. There are so many plot holes in this world that I mentioned in my last video, which makes the area flat as a result. Because we don't get to know much about the Omniverse or the residents, we don't feel any empathy or pity for them because there's no information to showcase how bad their lives were, Auntie included. This makes the need to want to help the world and the people force because it's just the plot doing the work, not us. And again, they don't bring up the Omniverse in the end credits. Did the universe just fade out and only a handful of people escape? Or did the two worlds combine to create a bigger version? Is there more to the Omniverse than just the hospital? Why do they call themselves Purple Iris Science Facility? These questions are never answered in the game, which is baffling because the Omniverse is a primary point to the plot, since that is Auntie's home and it's the world that Angus went to destroy to save himself. I'm part of the Power of Friends Games Discord server, and I see the developers answering these questions on it, like Iris is supposed to stand for inspiring researches of impossible sciences. But as I stated in my review, we shouldn't have to go to the devs to be given the answers. They should be able to give us this information in the game because it's part of the lore they're creating. This cheekiness the developers are doing is similar to what Mod Games did with Poppy Playtime, where they bribed their fans to buy their NFTs in exchange for lore about the game. Okay, that example might have been a bit harsh because I don't believe POF has done something like that, and to be fair, Mod Games did apologize for that stuff and stopped doing it. But the similarities are too close to ignore. The fact that you need to join any kind of social media like Discord or Tumblr just to get the main lore is a red flag in of itself. Don't get me wrong, you can still post some fun details and facts, but if that's how you're presenting the main story and lore rather than incorporating it into your game, that's a problem. The Omniverse plays a huge role in Soulscape, so it's only fair that it gets as much, if not more attention than it did previously. I'm not saying we need to know everything about the Omniverse. If you want to just focus on the hospital and labs, that's fine. Then tell us more about it. Expand more on that universe. I want to see how the hospital was established. Is it actually a hospital, or is it a facade while they do secret research? Tell us more about Auntie himself. Why was he created as both a chimera and for what purpose? You can also expand more on Auntie's family by telling us more about Henry, Nathaniel, Emily, Cole, even BB. How did Auntie meet his family? How do they all react to Auntie? If you want us to actually be invested in these characters, then give us a reason to make us care for them. Let us see what their lives were like before and after the corruption of their home. On top of that, expanding more on the Omniverse would also expand on Auntie and his background and development. Don't be stingy with the lore. Explore it with us in the game, not on social media. The memories of the egos are all too linear and they don't really set up the core trauma. Instead of leading up to it, we just go in, fight the big manifestation, and that's all. The puzzles are severely lacking in most of the egos. I did notice there was some environmental sign like kids' drawings in Chase's memory. While they do add some context to the setup, it's pretty vague and only lasts a few seconds. It feels like it's mostly there just to add dimension, but falls flat when they hardly give us any context as to what led up to those moments or why the kids saw this happen. I know that the POF developers don't want to trigger anyone or make anyone feel uncomfortable with this, but we're already exploring these kinds of traumas. Again, your audience is young adult. I highly doubt people under the age of 15 are going to be playing this game. And with the kinds of media we've been seeing, it's not like you can hide these kinds of topics. If you're going to be discussing them, then you need to be explicit. You need to set examples of how this trauma started and what kind of red flags there are. But don't say it in a dialogue, try showing it more through the environment. I'm not saying you have to go very deep into the ego's backstories, but you should at least explore more on how these traumas started, the warning signs, and the fallout to that event. You shouldn't downplay or censor these kinds of topics because it means we shouldn't be taking these kinds of situations seriously. And for the love of code, add some more puzzles. The linearity is too much, and most of the time when there are puzzles, they're too simple and just result in us going from point A to point B. These are memories. The ego's kept buried for a reason, so you need to work to get to it. Here's how I would write the memories. In Chase's memory, the path leading up to his house has many roadblocks. In order to fill in the holes, they have to find the drawings the kids made. When you pick up said drawing, Chase has a flashback of said event which opens the doorway, but causes him to become anxious and panicked. This results in smaller manifestations appearing for the group to fight. The more pages you collect, the more manifestations appear. Then when you reach the house, the memory plays out the same as it did before, and then you fight Stacy. This is where I would add more to her model. As mentioned in my review, I suggest giving her a two-faced personality, half her face innocent and the other incredibly ugly. I think it's only fitting giving her personality. For Jackie's memory, start off at the end of the Cool Patrol video when Danny calls Jackie to his place and gives him the suit. That could be his origin on how he became Jackaboy Man. For his theme, it's a beat-em-up concept where you need to battle the manifestations in order to pass. The first encounter of such a game could be in a training room where Jackie would train himself. Then you head out to the city trying to follow Jackie's past self. When you reach the university, make a cutscene where past Jackie is listening to the students about his hero persona, how some support him while others don't. Showcase how their negative comments cause doubt in Jackie. Then, to get to the university, fight the manifestations until one of them drops a key. Follow this up by going to the skating ring and bowling alley where we see past Jackie walking in where the bullies follow him. Then have the scene play out the same when past Jackie gets beaten up and the group fights the big manifestations. But this time, make them bigger and muscular to showcase how they are in Jackie's point of view. Jackie gives his past self a pep talk and gets the shard. I don't have too many problems with Marvin's memory. The tarot card puzzle was pretty interesting, but when the cutscenes play out, instead of showing Marvin having a one-sided conversation, show the extortionists when they are getting hired. Add more to their models in terms of giving them specific clothing, different shaped masks, and even names. They look like ordinary people, but as the memories and cutscenes go on, you notice the cracks in their mask and how aggressive their dialogue is, showcasing that maybe they know more than what they are letting Marvin on. And after fighting the bosses, another cutscene plays out where Marvin is about to be attacked by one, only for someone to stop it, which is revealed to be Jackie. He puts the con artist away and makes sure Marvin is safe. Then the magician brings him to his place to patch up his wounds. This could be the moment the two met instead of already knowing each other, adding more context to the relationship. On top of that, end the memory on a positive note, where Marvin realizes that his suffering was worth it, not only to be a better magician, but to have gotten a boyfriend out of the deal. In Henrik's memory, go into more details with Jolene and him. Show the two being under the stars and deciding to have a baby, but hint that Jolene had some health issues and that was why Henrik was hesitant. Show some fun moments with them, like when they discovered she was pregnant and going to a baby shower. For the puzzles, make it seem more personal. The gravestone one where Chase and Henrik have to put it together, make it more complex by having it match the room scenario where you need to make two rooms the exact same. Jackie and Marvin could go down that long hallway, but for every loop, add some dialogue of what happened when Jolene was giving birth to Emma. Same with what happened during Marvin's memory, where after going into a different room, there are voices above speaking. And the Angus one is fun out of them all, so you can keep that, just add the manifestations there. I think Bings could use the most work, mainly because we aren't sure how to feel about it memory-wise, given that according to Angus, he doesn't remember these events happening. So maybe you should have Angus remember things before or after Bing's soul shard to try and figure out what really happened to him. I mean, I don't get why you need to make it a mystery. We already know Angus died and fell to the void. Stop being cheeky with these concepts. And you even have canon moments with him and Bing, so don't say you can't spoil anything. And as for the puzzles in Bing's memory, I would like to see something similar to Marvin's memory. memory. But instead of tarot cards, there could be a sign that has a poem about how Bing felt towards Angus, and you need to find flowers, which are available in 3 options per puzzle, to figure out which one fits the theme based on the flower's meaning. Given the forest setting, it would make sense, and it would be cute to see how Bing's feelings were towards Angus in a haiku. But yeah, I do want to see deeper memories with the egos. I'm not saying we need to see them from the moment they were created all the way to the present, but dive a bit deeper into their traumas for the sake of understanding the horrors and seeing the red flags, and add a bit more in terms of gameplay, spice up the world to help them be more diverse, rather than just getting from point A to B while fighting the goop monsters. The gameplay suffers just as much as the story, so there's another thing to try and fix. The devs and fans like to crap on Sean, but none of the reviews for Septic or Soulscape ever commented on how these games tend to fumble Angus. Purely due to his actions and dialogue, I would say that his moral compass is just as messed up as BoJack Horseman. Most of this is due to Angus's presentation in Septiscape, which is something I neglected to mention in my Soulscape review, but I'll explain it here. Throughout Septiscape, Angus hardly gets any time to breathe as his survival hunter self, rather than just being his anti-self. We see how much he blames Sean for what happened to him, both in terms of his death and becoming anti. And even though he does apologize to the egos he's corrupted, he still doesn't seem to grasp the fallout of what he did to the Mindscape, still blaming it on his creator. Soulscape then follows this up by giving us a grumpy, short-tempered, dumbfounded, and prideful Angus throughout the game. Angus Irwin casts many flaws over the events of the sequel because he's still keeping more secrets from the egos, and his first instinct on everything is to become aggressive and lash out. As a result, I didn't truly care when Angus turned into his past self and had his soul be fractured. In fact, I was pleased. I thought that this was the Power of Friends games actually responding to Angus's consequences by putting him in a position where he has limited power to help him understand what he's done wrong. But of course, this falls flat when Angus doesn't realize his mistakes in the sequel. Even in Soulscape, when they fight Auntie, he doesn't really acknowledge the damage he did to the Chimera in the Omniverse, stating he's sorry, but his apology is more half-assed, like a sully teenager who tells his mom he nicked a toy. Much like Auntie's flaw in his character, Angus suffers from the fact he's justified in what he did. He's always blaming others for the problems that happen, even though most of these incidents occurred because of him. Angus was the one who took Auntie's soul in order to save himself, making the Chimera become this glitched out state and resulting in the limbo status of the Omniverse. Yet he constantly berates Auntie for saying he had no control over what happened, nor does he actually care about the fates of the residents of the Omniverse. He yells at Sean that his creator abandoned him and didn't do anything, yet doesn't fault the community much since we also didn't care for him any more than the YouTuber. He also resorts to taking extreme measures just to get what he wants. He took over Sean's body and controlled him for a whole month just because he remembered who he was and wanted Sean to pay. He corrupts the other egos just to stop Sean from getting to him and even breaks the Mindscape in certain parts as a result. I know that I mentioned in my Soulscape review that Angus is a well-written bad guy because of his complexity, and he has a great character as a result. But one of his main flaws the fans fail to see is his lack of self-responsibility. Angus never admits his own faults about what he has done, and even when he does, it's half-assed, and he tries to justify his actions with his backstory. Don't get me wrong, Sean had just as much of a part to play in creating the bad ending, where he kills Angus and destroys the Mindscape, resulting in everyone's death. But the fans blame only Sean for that when Angus had something to do with the downfall. Had Angus just talked to Sean instead of being consumed by his anger and hatred, he could have avoided this confrontation and spared everyone. Yes, Sean did stab Angus in the bad ending, but Angus was the first one to attack and Sean tried to defend himself. And let's face it, if the roles were reversed, Angus would have taken the chance to kill Sean with zero hesitation. And he was kind of an ass when he told Sean how the corruption spreads only after he got stabbed. Dick move, Angus. Dick move. And I know a lot of people are going to protest by saying, well, Angus is being overcome by negative powers and negativity, so he wouldn't be thinking straight because of that. Look, I get it. Angus is dealing with some things, and Nega's instability didn't help. But in Septiscape, there are moments when Angus isn't under the influence of the negative half of Auntie's soul. We see him being somewhat content in Sean's body at first. We see him being guilty when he takes control of the egos and hurts them. We even see how upset he is when he comes to Henrik. Angus wasn't always driven by Nega's influence. He had plenty of moments when he was acting of his own accord. In other words, he was conscious during a lot of these actions he caused. I'm not faulting Angus for everything. I understand that there were situations that were out of his hands, which he couldn't control. But the fact that he was conscious of what he was doing does make the situation somewhat more gray rather than black and white. Let me set an example. In BoJack Horseman, Sarah Lynn dies in Season 3 because BoJack invited her on a bender, and she died of an overdose from the heroin he had. After the episode, we see how bad BoJack felt about her death, which we do sympathize with. Yeah, he did kind of screw her over by taking her on a bender, but we can't forget that Sarah Lynn was the one who told BoJack episodes prior that she was only getting clean just so she could get a bigger high when ingesting the drugs again and to call her when he wants to party. She's just as much responsible for what happened to her as he is, but that's beside the point. Anyways, we see how after her death, it did take a toll on BoJack, and he brings it up throughout the rest of Season 3 and the others. He holds guilt, believing that it was his fault she ended up this way, and he has every right to blame himself since he did have a part of it. But seeing him being remorseful does add sympathy to his character, as I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this situation of losing a loved one and not being able to save them in time. However, the sympathy we have been giving BoJack over those seasons drip away when we discover the truth about what happened during Sarah Lynn's death. How BoJack not only created a story to cover his deeds involved in the bender, but he waited 17 minutes before calling the paramedics that could have saved Sarah Lynn's life. The fact that BoJack not only took the time to wait for saving his daughter figure, but was cleaning his tracks to make himself just as much of a victim, only showcases how malicious, narcissistic, and vile he was during that time. It changes our viewpoint of him because we thought he deserved our sympathy and our forgiveness since he was regretful in not being able to save her, only to realize he chose not to get her help right away. And much like Angus, he was conscious the whole time, enough cognitive function to create such a ruse that would clear his name. He may have been drunk and high, but he still had enough stability to have manipulated those events. Now, obviously Angus never killed anyone, but the parallels of Angus and BoJack's actions are too close together to ignore. While I do sympathize with Angus because of his trauma and suffering, I can't excuse his behavior and his lack of self-responsibility, especially when he believes he is justified in what he did and doesn't fully acknowledge how much he hurt people. Whether or not you want to forgive Angus and BoJack, that's up to the audience, but I want to point out that forgiveness isn't something that should be handed out. It should be earned. Both parties need to come to a compromise. That's how closure is really earned. We're living in an era where movies and shows have taught us that you should forgive and forget because that's the right thing to do. Coco, Encanto, Turning Red, all of those movies have people who abuse their families for years, and all it takes is one falling out, one scene showing the trauma, and suddenly everything is fine? That is not how the real world works. Trauma and having a bad life is not an excuse for tormenting and hurting others. It only makes you just as bad as those people that have hurt you. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have forgiven Mei Ling's mom or Alma Madrigal. I do believe they are redeemable, but they shouldn't have been forgiven so easily. Forgiveness needs to be earned, and considering the damages these grandmas and mothers cause, they have a long road. It's just like Todd from BoJack Horseman stated.
Keep doing this! You can't keep doing shitty things and then feel bad about yourself like that makes it okay. You need to be better. You are all the things that are wrong with you. It's not the alcohol or the drugs or any of the shitty things that happened to you in your career or when you were a kid. It's you.
While many people have their own views on this speech, I believe that Todd's point is that it doesn't matter what happened to us in our past, only we can decide our future. While trauma and pain can shape our views on reality and who we are as people, at the end of the day, it shouldn't define us. Only we are the ones allowing that trauma to dictate our lives. Okay, I know I went on a bit of a rant, but I wanted to make my points. So that being said, I think the devs could have utilized Sean better in the sequel by having him be that reflection for Angus. I feel like Sean could be a representation for the Hunter, reminding him that he still has inner demons that need to be addressed and dealt with. Have Sean constantly berate Angus by telling him the faults he fails to see, like how Angus was just as much responsible for destroying the Mind Cape in that timeline as Sean did. Have Sean remind Angus that Auntie is suffering because of the Hunter's selfishness. I don't want Sean to be another villain for the Scape game, since I mostly see him as a neutral force in this predicament he found himself in. I think it would have been interesting to have it be revealed that Sean sent Angus to that world in order to free Auntie, which would have been an interesting twist. I'll be honest, I feel they underused Sean in this sequel, and while it is possible they're going to use him in Endgame, you could have done a better job at setting him up. But yeah, my main idea for this point is that Angus should at least be aware of his actions and have it affect him. He should be somewhat accountable for realizing that he is just as much at fault for what happened, and see how it affected not just him, but everyone around him. For the love of code, stop with these game references. We know this is a fan game. We know these are Jacksepticeye egos. We don't need to be constantly bombarded with the games that Jack played over the years. The purpose of the Escape games is to focus on the egos and their lives. Sean should be a background afterthought. In other words, any references that are in these Escape games should only be related to the egos. Escape did a great example of this, but Soulscape fails because there are so many, I want to say Easter eggs, but these references are all over the place to the point they aren't that clever. I'm not saying you can't have these game references, but you should be more mindful of ones that actually impact the Decepticeyes. Game characters that relate to them in terms of the genre of their games or the personalities they have, which might be similar to their egos. We don't need Undertale because it's so overused in a lot of these fan games for Jacksepticeye. We don't need the boss because this isn't a crossover. We don't need Animal Crossing because we already had Chad as our supplier for weapons and items. We don't need Little Misfortune because, well, honestly, I hate that game and the character. I know, personal bias, but I'm allowed one pass per video. If you want to use references, that's fine, but since the sequel is more focused around the Decepticeyes themselves, I suggest getting games or media that could relate to them. For example, with Chase, you could incorporate more of his Bro Average videos or the video games that Sean played that featured Chase. Henrik's references could be involved with the hospital games that are on the channel, like Bio Inc. Redemption or Surgeon Simulator. For Jackie, keep the Attitude City bits and even the Lore of the Cool Patrol video, but also add games or characters that could relate to him, like maybe the South Park characters from The Fractured Butthole, since Jackie Boy Man did play that game. Maybe the characters from Life is Strange, since one of the boys in that version plays as a superhero. I don't know about the Marvel characters, since they are owned by Disney, and that could be a lawsuit waiting to happen, but hey, maybe some reference to Spider-Man to help inspire the superhero? Marvin's references could be more involved with role-playing characters with magic and wizards, like the South Park characters from The Stick of Truth, a reference to Try to Fall Asleep. Hell, make a reference to Marvin's grandmother who relied on medication for her mental health and bad hip. That is canon, by the way, look it up. Even the other egos could have references to fit their aesthetic. Bing can have Detroit become human and Portal. Robbie can also have his own references with zombie games like The Walking Dead, Telltale Edition, Joel and Ellie from The Last of Us, maybe Resident Evil characters in Dead by Daylight. Even Jameson could get characters from Cuphead and Bendy, as well as Sean Flynn. Video game and media references are fine, but they should fit with the aesthetic of egos themselves because Soulscape is focusing on them, not Sean. And if you really want to go crazy, why not add more original characters into the mix? We already have the Almeda residents, Jolene. There are lots of original characters in Soulscape that are present and have interactions and relations with the egos themselves. Why not add more? The Mindscape shouldn't have to be limited to just Jack's channel. I believe that adding some original characters could add more dimension to the Mindscape, especially if they have any relations with the egos themselves. This is the egos' world. They don't have to be limited to just their creator and his life. They are just as sentient in this game as Jack, so showcase that by exploring their lives outside of his YouTube career. Now for our final point. I pretty much ranted about this concept, which took up at least a third of my review, so I don't want to over-explain again, but I will recap my points. There's nothing wrong with using the fourth wall breakage in media, be it movies, shows, or video games, but there are rules that should be set if one plans to use this. Most of the time, the fourth wall is played up as a joke, usually calls something out that we as the audience know but the characters don't. Or it could be set up to give the player a scare by making it seem that the characters in the screen know more about you than they should. The fourth wall is used either for comedical or horror purposes. On top of that, the fourth wall has a strict set of rules. It has to be used for either of those purposes, has to include the audience in some way, and it can be part of the world building, but only when established early on, as well as only allowing certain characters within that media to know what the fourth wall is about, while others should remain oblivious. When you ignore these concepts, then the trope itself becomes lazy and makes the world fall apart as a result. Not to mention, it limits how you can write the building of your environment and characters. A prime example of this would be the Paper Mario series. I'm a huge fan of the Thousand Year Door and Super for the most part. While that series has declined in fans over time, there is a reason for that, one that I don't think people take into consideration. Paper Mario is a different world of Mario where everything is made of, well, paper. It's two-dimensional and flat in terms of art style, but it made up for it with its developed characters, interesting plot, and overall exciting RPG-style battle mechanics. After Super Paper Mario, the series started to de-escalate in terms of quality. Many people blame it on the fact that the battle systems are too complicated and not as fun, like the sticker or paint system. Others complain there's no more character diversity like what we saw in the first 3 games, how much of the population is just toads, or the fact that they limit your party with just you and one other character that doesn't even help you in battle, versus the many party members with personality that have their own moves. While those are contributing factors that have made people turn away from the franchise, there's also a bigger issue that is overlooked when asserting the differences in the later and earlier entries. That being a realization of the fourth wall breakage. Let me elaborate. Paper Mario has always been stylized to make the characters look like they were hand-drawn. They were created on paper itself. The way they move, the way the world is blocky and has many edges. That's what separates Paper Mario from the 3D Mario games. The thing is, despite being in a world made of paper mache, the characters act normally and don't take notice of what their surroundings are made of. To them, their world is normal, and it's no different than other games of the Mario franchise, flat or not. The first 3 games never acknowledged the very existence of a paper identity of the world itself. They went along with that concept, focusing more on the story and characters. Yes, there were times when the game acknowledged that Mario was made out of paper, but was mostly to be used as a way to explore the environments and was played as a joke. The Thousand-Year Door is the biggest example of this. There are 4 large black chests throughout the world of Rogueport. Every time you open one, the soul trapped inside would give Mario a curse, as they call it. Basically, they would give Mario the ability to change his body into a certain shape. An airplane, boat, all rolled up, and even flat. This is where the game breaks the reality of the world, but they do it creatively and not in a harmful way. First of all, these curses, as the chests call them, are actually abilities. They just hype it up as such for a more dramatically comical reasoning for the characters. I mean, being able to morph your body into any shape you want sounds awesome, but probably painful, which is all the more reason that it's a good thing paper doesn't have bones. That would not be a pleasant sound. However, we as the audience know that Mario is made out of paper, but Mario and all the other characters are aware of this and consider it a strange curse, when in actuality, it's just a way to help the player get to certain areas of the world that they couldn't get there normally. Yes, the game does kind of break the fourth wall by revealing the paper concept of this world, but they do it in a way where it's not distracting and helps the player in terms of gameplay. The characters don't bring up the curse after you get them, nor do they ever question such abilities because it's a mechanic. See where Paper Mario followed this example by having Mario gain the power to flip which way he is looking in both 2D and 3D. It's not really a paper-based mechanic, but it does involve messing with the world's abilities, so I count it. Even so, they play up this as a power that is given to Mario, and it's to help the gameplay by using the setting for puzzle and monster fighting. Unfortunately, after Super Paper Mario, Nintendo decided to embrace the paper world of this dimension in all the wrong ways. By that, I mean they used the concept of the flat world and revolved the mechanics and story around it. Sticker Star, released on the 3DS, revolved the battling systems to fighting with stickers and having to collect set items for a meteor which is called the Sticker Comet. Color Splash, released in 2016, centered around the premise of draining the color out of the paper, making the people and the buildings blank and colorless. The only thing Mario can use in terms of battle is his hammer, which is equipped with paint. No special items in battle, no other partner to help out. It's just like Sticker Star except with paint instead of stickers. Origami King, the most recent entry in the Paper Mario franchise, is all about origami. The world is more vibrant, I'll give it that, but the bosses are all just office supplies that are sentient. The enemies are once again regular Mario villains just folded up, and the battle system results in puzzle solving by folding and rotating the platform like origami instead of just attacking with what you have. And once again, you're limited to your supplies and attacks. The battle system is interesting, but it's too convoluted and confusing. I remember having to find walkthroughs on the bosses because I didn't know what path would make me get there faster and deal the most damage. I couldn't even finish Origami King and deleted it from my Switch because of how frustrated I was. Personal rant aside, this is why Paper Mario started to fail as a series. When Nintendo embraced the papyrus the world is made out of, they started to incorporate it into their stories and mechanics. What started out as RPG Mario games became more convoluted and complicated. What made the Paper Mario series so distinguished from other Mario games was the creativity in the story and characters, not in the way they utilized the pages the world is made out of. They acknowledged it from time to time, but it was never to the point it was a main mechanic to the games. When Sticker Star came out on the DS, that was when the programmers and directors took the sheet the world was made out of to a whole new level. At that point, they were no longer letting the flat environment be part of the narrative, they made it be the center of it. Paper reference after paper reference in the people, in the battles, in the story itself. By embracing the genetics of the world is what caused the quality to go downhill. The first 3 Paper Mario games were focused not on the folio setting, but on the investing stories, the relatable characters, and the simple yet entertaining battle system. When Nintendo incorporated the world makeup into its narrative, they became limited. Suddenly, the plot had to revolve around things that affected the people and environment made of leaf, stickers, paint, origami, which in turn affected the battle mechanics. Instead of it being a regular beat-em-up or turn-based style, we have to plaster stickers on the enemies, we have to drain them of their color, or we have to play hopscotch across a ring. The decrease in character diversity is a contributing factor, but the main reason why the recent Paper Mario games have been failing is because they are overusing the paper mechanics. It's become the main focus of the story, the gameplay, the characters, and the world. Suddenly, there's a cap on the creativity, resulting in linear playthroughs rather than pure exploration. Instead of getting invested in the different settings, we power through them because everything looks too similar now. We don't care about the characters enough to get attached to them because they don't stick around long enough or they don't have any personality. And the battles are frustrating because they are more complicated than what they previously were in order to adapt to the main theme of the story. Paper Mario is an example of overusing the fourth wall and the consequences to it. The world has lots of diversity, it's visionary, and overall lack of charm once Nintendo began to incorporate the paper mechanics into their games. And because they centered the premise of the pages around the gameplay, other aspects of what made the first 3 Paper Mario games become lost as a result. Like I mentioned before, it's fine if you want to use the fourth wall breakage in your stories or shows. However, if it's going to be that big, then you need to include it right away in the beginning so people can expect this. The Paper Mario series didn't start off with it this way, which is why it failed later on because Nintendo overused it far too late. Free Guy worked with this concept well because the whole point of that movie was video game characters becoming sentient. Of course it's going to be fourth wall breakages. That's the point of the movie. Undertale used this concept of the fourth wall breakage in order to create many routes for a player to take and to test their morality. The fourth wall trope is used for a purpose, not because it's fun. Soulscape did not understand this concept. The devs didn't understand this concept, and that's why the sequel failed. The overuse of the fourth wall breakage is what drove me away from Soulscape, because not only is it unnecessary to the plot, it makes the world disappointing as a result, because why should we care about these versions of the egos anymore? They're not ones that you care enough to make real, so what's the point? I know that they wanted to do the fourth wall concept because of Undertale and even the boss, but the fact that you're ripping off other games that use this trope without understanding why they did them in the first place only shows how little research you've done into the games and prove how lazily you've written them in. So it begs the question, how would I fix this? Well, I think there is a way to have a happy medium where you can do fourth wall breakage and be more related to Undertale without acknowledging this is a game. Make it an alternative universe. Really think about it, AUs of the Septiceye egos aren't new in the Jacksepticeye community. Many people have made their own variations of the egos between their canons and story. Hujikari, Veikun, Lady Valcat, Sarcastic Pastas, Inspired Draw AW, Dallas Crofto, Live Me Entertain You, Super Harry Potter Love, you get the idea. You already have your headcanons for these versions of the egos, so why not just do that? You can still reference the concept that they aren't the canon egos, just not in a video game way. State that it's only a world that a group of fans created based on their own beliefs, and it became so popular amongst them that it eventually started its own life, like manifestation, the process by which thoughts are turned into things, either real or imagined, and then made known through action. Perhaps Angus and Auntie know that the mindscape is not created by the real Sean or Jack, that it was thought up by the fans. Instead of calling them developers, call them creators or writers. Hell, go a few steps further by implying that the different endings are scenarios that the creators thought up but still exist because it happened. Maybe the Omniverse was the original idea of what the mindscape would have looked like, but they decided to branch off and create 2 different versions. Instead of a patch of the game, it could have been a prototype of the mindscape but still kept around for some of the other creators to tinker around with. You can also elaborate this concept by using the Omniverse. Maybe the scientists were trying to test the idea of the multiverse, which is why they created Auntie, who had that ability, so they could find different worlds like the mindscape. But because Angus took Auntie's soul during a test, the world and resonance became distorted. And when Angus got Auntie's soul, he gained the power to see the truth of their world and realized it wasn't canon. Personally, I would consider this a better alternative since the idea of multiverse, while not a new concept in media, hasn't been done too often when it comes to video games, especially in fan games like Markiplier and Jacksepticeye. The egos could still have the revelation that the world isn't the real one, but not in a meta sort of way, and they can be even more conflicted as they realize that all the horrible things that happened to them were not caused by their creator, but by a group of fans. You don't need to copy what other games are doing, be original, think outside the box. Using concepts from other games like Undertale and The Boss prove how lazy you are when it comes to writing original ideas, especially when you slap that concept onto your work without understanding why they used those tropes and how it affected the games. But there can be a happy medium where you want to acknowledge the world is not the true one Sean made, while also not using the dumb plot twist of, oh, it was a game all along. Again, Undertale did this right. You devs did not. So those are the main aspects I would change for Soulscape to be a better sequel. I also have other ideas, but they are more minor, such as adding more cutscenes and animations, redesigning other manifestations, add in health bars for enemies. I think that was it. Everything else I pretty much already covered. Again, I'm not saying that the devs should have utilized all the other ideas, but with what went wrong with Soulscape, they could have had a better shot at making a worthy sequel with some of these ideas. I know the devs are human and they are trying their best, but I've heard from some of the fans their own complaints about Soulscape. Not naming any names here for privacy reasons, but the fact that the fans are now questioning and seeing the flaws of the sequel, maybe the Power of Friends games should reconsider doing a reboot of the Scape series to better accommodate their fans' expectations. Soulscape being the main one, as it has suffered the most, and considering it is only the second installment to the trilogy, yeah, I'm not having any hopes for Endscape at this rate. I'm trying not to be harsh but fair in my judgment and criticism because I want the best for this series. I loved Septiscape and its premise. I think it had a fair shot at being an interesting and investing Septic Ego series, only for the sequel to shit all over it. So Power Friends, if any of you are watching this, I recommend you take these suggestions into consideration if you want to please your fans and stay true to the Jacksepticeye community. What are some things you would improve in Soulscape if you could change the game? Do you think these suggestions are fair and would like to see them in a revision of the sequel? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. With that said, sayonara, and stay classy, my otakus!